Thank you for that. We'll begin our question and answer session. Go ahead.
Question for Dr. Bain. How does the ResRad model account for airborne radiation? It's asking in light of the Harvard study that saw elevated levels of particle-borne radionuclides within areas of UOGD wells.
Sure. It's actually based on your inhalation. So there's a different factor. For example, I talked about that recreation where you had a hunter or a jogger. They would be breathing more. So there's an actual volume of air being brought in and out, as opposed to residential. Residential, you don't breathe as much because you're sleeping 8 hours a night, hopefully. So it's definitely there. It's a general model, so there's not a really good rendering of how much dust is made. So it's based on an average dust, but it's definitely includes, based on an estimate of an average dust, how much you're breathing.
Another question for you, Dr. Bain. Most landfill liners are only rated to last 100 years. So what will their decay do to your numbers?
The landfills will get leaky, and you won't be getting it in the leachate. That's the kind of, both Justin and I showed you all a lot of history. And the reason you look at history is so you can try to avoid doing the same thing twice. And unfortunately, I think we are getting close to doing something where we're going to have big messes. And we put the trash in a place so we don't have to think about it. We don't want to be going back and digging it up or putting in new, that's exactly the point. We don't want to be creating systems where we have duty cycles that are 3 human, 1.5 to 2 to 3 human lifetimes, because we're going to create a bigger mess.
Great, thank you. A question maybe to both panelists. Are you aware of studies on radiation exposure to those who drive the brine trucks? And do they typically wear radiation badges like X-ray techs do?
No, I'm not aware of studies. It's a great question and a huge problem, and that's why I'm so excited to connect with Dr. Bain, because it's, as far as I know, the first attempt to really talk to the workers, learn what their doses are. There's a set of Louisiana legal cases that looked at oil field workers, and they had they used a different program called IREP, the Interactive Radio Epidemiological Program, to analyze worker exposures, and the numbers they found, in that case showed that these workers' cancers were caused by the radio exposure on the job. No, the workers do not wear appropriate protection. There may be some specific jobs that are really gunky when they have like a neoprene, looks like a little yellow rain suit. But there's also stories of workers going in with like a shovel and a t-shirt, and it's really shocking what they're exposed to.
We've got one coming in from online here. For Justin, regarding the Fairmont brine facility, what strategy would you recommend for grassroots community members trying to protect their community from this facility and future facilities in the state of West Virginia?
Yeah, absolutely. The meeting that I sped through, it's this YouTube video of a 2015 meeting when West Virginia groups got a chance to ask Antero, one of the operators, detailed questions about radioactivity, and they could not answer their questions, and it's just stunning. The facility still got built, but it was a really important truth to power moment, and they formed a group called Friends of the Hughes River Watershed. I know that was really effective. So I think forming a group, if you don't already have one, or if you have one, really focusing on this issue, because we have a lot of, there's journalism, there's science, there's community stories, there's a lot now that people can bring to the table to show. And then there's, something that I try to do in the reporting is lay out the industry's own documents. So if you have a collection of people, then take those things that you have and try and present it. And do you have comments on that too?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the former question is something you could do right away is, there are going to be people that come in and tell you, oh, everything's fine, we've got this all under control. So you have to come back and say, well, can we have everyone wear badges? And you see how fast that will change the dynamic. But I think that something, Justin and I don't have the authority to make someone wear badges. So this is putting us in a difficult situation, is we got to prove something that could be easily disproved with, just a modicum of public health interventions. But, so I strongly recommend just, if it's safe, show us that it's safe, and there's tools to do that.
Thank you.
And that's a really good point, right? So one worker I remember told me this story of like, well, the reason we don't wear protection is because if we dressed as we should, residents would be really scared and think oil and gas was dangerous. I don't know if that is the reason, but that has come from more than one person. Education, I don't think anyone who's promoting the industry and promoting its jobs wants to be caught, leading people to jobs that are going to make them sick or potentially kill them. And I think if you can build that awareness in a level-headed way, that can really, start important dialogues.
Okay, another question for Justin, I believe. What would an investigative journalist need to conduct a retrospective health study on oil and gas workers?
Yeah, this is an amazing question. It should be done. I mean, the one issue is there's a lot of movement in the industry. So people, like someone from Oklahoma, goes to Arkansas because there's a shale boom there, and then they come up to Ohio, and then they go out to North Dakota and the Bakken. Maybe people move around a lot. It's hard to catch people in one environment, which is often what you have to do with science, right? I think I would start maybe as we're trying to do, okay, we have one facility, we know the levels there because we had access, we took a lot of samples, and we have a small group of workers, and maybe try and build out from there.
Yeah, and the other problem is moving around. What is the impact of this oil and gas waste along with the coal mining waste? Or there's all of these mixes which are so hard to characterize, and so then you have to, what is the risk with this mix, this mix, this mix? And so it's not only are you going to need to have this pretty exquisite record of exposure, you're going to have a record of exposure beyond just this occupational or living next to these facilities.
Mm-hmm.
Another question on protective equipment. Is there actually any protective attire, bodysuits, respiratory eye protection that is known to adequately protect the wearer from these levels of radiation that would, for example, be encountered in the sludge?
Well, I mean, that's the point of the badge. You put the badge on, and it's measuring your exposure, and as soon as you hit that threshold where you should not be exposed anymore, you're supposed to, there's going to be, ideally, the radiation safety officer comes in and says, you're at your limit, go home. And that's why the badges will protect you. If you keep it out of your mouth, and you keep it out of your lungs, you're doing a lot. But I mean, you want to have that secondary measure so you can say kaput and walk out when it's time.
And you would need a self-contained breathing apparatus,
Right.
with scuba, like a scuba tank. So you would, in a situation like Fairmont Brine, you would have to have external air. You don't need a mask, even a good one would not be enough. You would need, pretty sophisticated equipment, but also, like Dr. Bain said, it's not that hard to prevent, to really save a lot. I mean, so many workers I talk to are like, whoa, maybe I shouldn't have smoked 20 cigarettes during the day, because every time you smoke a cigarette, and it's a cigarette, but you're bringing your hands to your mouth. And so just simple education would go a long way to lower exposures.
Quick follow-up to that, is there a name for those badges?
Well, like a dosimeter, right?
Yeah, dosimeter.
Still have time for one more?
We have time for one more. Yeah.
Can either of you discuss the legal limits of exposure to radioactivity, specifically how the limits are determined and how the legal limits compare to public health limitations of exposure?
Go, if you got it.
Well, so the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has a limit for workers, which is 5,000 millirems or 5 rems a year. And for the general public, it's 100 millirems. It's a lot less. So at Fairmont Brine, the EPA actually did go to the site and did testing too. They found 3 millirems per hour in some of that sludge. So that would mean if you were a worker working with that sludge, you know, and you worked like a 12-hour shift, which a lot of workers do, you know, for like a week, you're going to be, and you're in intimate contact with the sludge, which you often are, and you're breathing it in too, so you may have even additional exposures, you will be over that limit. OSHA has a limit, which I think is like 2 millirems an hour. So there are limits that the industry could be held accountable on. Unfortunately, OSHA has been pretty absent from this part of the industry. But yeah, those are some of the main ones.
Yeah, and then it's just fractured governance because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has a very select set of facilities that it's concentrating on, and you know, they're not necessarily thinking about this naturally occurring radioactive material because they're looking at places where you're concentrating radioactive material for other purposes, whether it be power production or weapon, you know, production. So I mean, there's gaps because, you know, all of this we're working on a rapidly evolving landscape of contaminants that, you know, it's not like you can go back and say the oil fields in the 1900s are a good proxy for what's going on now because it's completely different.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bain and Justin, for your presentation today. Thank you very much.